Awesome. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the April Solutions Council meeting. So glad you're here in person and online. Um, I am out of town, so as a gift to Drew for today, I'm going to pass it over to him and let him lead this meeting. We have a packed agenda with lots of good stuff to talk about, so we'll dive right in.
Thank you, Kim. I'm just pulling up the agenda real quick, and it looks like we're starting with updates and going to thank you.
Do you have anybody for that?
Do we have anybody online or in person for public comment? And do we have anything submitted? There was a chat. I didn't see what that chat just was. Sharing is good.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure you did that.
But thank you. I appreciate that. I was gonna skip that.
I
Okay, no public comments. We will, for our community updates, we have a pretty packed agenda today, so we're gonna ask those of you that are on committees, in the community to please submit, any updates or information you want to share with the group, via email to Nadia, and, we will get that out to the group, with our, follow-up. So with that, we will go into staff updates.
Thank you, Vice Chair Williamson. Good afternoon, everyone. Jess Larson here in the office. Happy to be with you. I have the first round of updates, and then I think Emily and Nadia have a few more updates. My biggest and most exciting update is that Gabi Duarte is here on our team now, joining us in the community relations team. So she'll be one of her roles is overseeing our advisory body work under Emily's leadership. And then another big part of the work is all the broad community engagement we're doing. Another thing we talk about here a lot right now, also under Emily's leadership. And then with our board, with our public, with our partners. Also supporting Hamid, who you may have met along the way on our team. And then last, our work in advancing equity through our access and opportunity areas of work, both in-house and supporting the culture of the department, but also in the way we do business with our community partners. And that work, as you may know, is led under Trenard. So that encompasses the team of community relations and Gabi's wonderful new assignment here in the department. So welcome, Gabi. We're so thrilled to have you. Anything you want to say to kind of further introduce yourself to the Solutions Council?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I actually come from 12 years of service at the state level, working in tourism. So a very different industry, but still very service focused. And so I'm excited to get a little closer to home. I'm from Washington County. I grew up in Tualatin, and I'm excited that there's so much opportunity to continue making impacts in this area. So excited to be here. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, thank you. The onboarding is already real quick.
Yeah.
We've had her around with the Metro, went to RPOC. Today we went with Katie over to the Elks Club to give a presentation on the transitional house. So she's learning everything about housing real fast.
That's been great. That's been great.
Additionally, you may have noticed that we are also hiring for a homeless services system evaluation and data manager. That position is currently live. I think it will be open for another 2 weeks. So that is the team that oversees all of our data operations work, our analytical work, our program evaluation, and training. So if you know anyone who's loves all of the wonky work of homeless services system and data systems, and would be a great leader for us to think more strategically about how we continuously improve our program work. It's a peer position to Katie, like a yin and a yang of this program implementation and then the behind. Indeed. Couldn't be a better way to like make a plug for that. Come be Katie's buddy. All right. Next, just a quick update to say our Board of County Commissioners approved the bylaws changes that you worked so carefully on and helped us refine. So 3 cheers, that body of work is done. And then next, thank you, Kim was mentioning recently, seeing some news articles. We've been doing a lot of talking to our neighbors recently. Thank you, Emily and team. I mean, it's really a big, broad team effort. So we've been in the news a little bit because our neighbors at Reed's Crossing are talking about concerns around safety, as well as our neighbors, our new neighbors at Oak Hills. These are, as you may know, are the neighborhoods where we will be moving in with a central county pods village off of 209th and TB Highway. And then that project plans to open in July right now. And then, as we've been talking to you all for a very long time at this point, Cornell Road Recovery, which is on Cornell and TV Highway at the new hotel we purchased. So those conversations continue. Please join us. Please come help us have hard conversations with neighbors and help them understand the value of these services in our community, or just keep giving kudos to Nadia and Martin and Emily and Katie and everybody who is showing up for these tough conversations, because the work will continue on through the summer. I think our next meeting is in June.
May 20th for the Central County Safe Rest Village. You're hearing it here first. We just met today actually to get it up on the website and work on a flyer and all of that. So
Fun.
and then early June for Cornell Road Recoveries next week.
Great work.
What time?
5:30 to 7 p.m. at Reedville Elementary.
Neighborhood.
Yeah.
But that's my birthday also.
Priorities, Zoe. Priorities.
Okay, you can decide to pop by. No pressure.
I'll bring you more.
Moving along, next, speaking of being in the news, you may have heard, or you may have helped us, Three Cheers, Kim Marshall, and others. The city of Portland, the mayor of city of Portland, put forward an official request to Washington County to send additional resources, to send roughly $6 million to the city to offset reductions that they are experiencing to sustained overnight shelters. This letter of request was taken up in a public work session last week, and we weren't sure how that discussion was going to go. And I just want to thank you all for any part you may have had in helping frame that discussion for our elected leaders, because they really heard you. They really listened to the other city mayors and councilors and local law enforcement saying, we need these dollars in Washington County to meet the needs of Washington County. And our board very swiftly made that decision and are sending, I don't believe they've yet sent but we'll be sending a letter of response saying, we're sorry, we can't assist you, but we look forward to being a part of this ongoing regional work. So I just wanted to share that conclusion of that kind of quick hit and very public question. That's where that matter resolved. And speaking of regional work, we had our first RPOC meeting, the regional planning. Sorry, I think it's regional. Yes, it is planning.
Policy and oversight.
It's policy.
And policy and oversight.
It's right here. Yeah, Policy and Oversight Committee. Yesterday, of which the esteemed Zoe Copiano sits on behalf of representing Washington County service providers. So here you are, I'm officially onboarding you into the role with your big fancy binder. And
Osmosis.
my sense is, and Zoe, I'd be welcome to your thoughts too here. My sense is that while things are off to a fine start, there is a little bit of angstiness in the room about things like bylaws and who got a seat and who didn't get a seat, and kind of just some really basic beginner points. And so I think the work of resetting a regional table that's going to help facilitate continuous improvement and ongoing public confidence building so we can renew this measure is a big job. We're starting with just some real ground level trust building work, I think, even at this table. So if you know folks who are doing that work, please share in your experience and perspectives of the value of local and regional work working in partnership, if you will. And we're really just trying to help reset the table so that we can come together as a region to renew this measure. But I think we've got some work to do. And thank you, Zoe, for saying yes to that big job. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Yeah.
I got myself into.
No
But, I mean, it's still in the early development and, our first meeting was boarding and structure and, the goal is, align across counties, but also acknowledge that different local systems and capacity are not the same. And yeah, the representation discussion, 18 voter members, and 22 in total. And from those, there are 3 service providers. I don't know why, one elected official says 4, but maybe because there's a coalition of community of color representative who also works in the homeless service. So there was an elected official who says that will lead into a conflict of interest, and there was an overrepresentation of homeless service providers. Which I don't know where that come from. So a little bit of a discussion, a concern was raised by an elected official, and it was good that Metro chair set the ground and said that was already a decision. We're not going back to a discussion of how this body is going to be set again. So appreciate that, and also appreciate that they are putting this very important representative in this table, and not only elected officials.
Yeah.
No, about everything.
Yeah. We do need all voices.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you, Zoe, for helping represent. I mean, that the role of I see the value of the community service providers being in this voting body is that, not unlike elected officials, you face very directly the needs of the community. You are standing there at the front lines, the front door of the community needs. So you can represent that. I think that's so important for the conversation.
And I can explain a little bit of what the work is going to be. Consolidating governance, obviously, into this one body. Before there was 2. Aligning how investments, regional investments are going to be set and reviewed and approved. Updating performance regional performance measures, and improving also data transparency with a regional dashboard, and creating more consistency into standards, terminology standards, and across the region. So build that trust that as service providers know for sure that we are doing it and we're doing it well, but that doesn't mean that everybody out there is seeing the same thing that we're seeing. So trying to put everybody the same lens as much as we can. Okay.
And we'll be sure to keep your body updated as that work continues. 2 more items. One, just a heads up, you're going to get a very big email, probably from Nadia, later this week to this committee with our HUD reports. As our continuum of care body, our oversight board, your role is, one of your roles, you have many, is to sort of affirm the reports we need to send to HUD. And as you may know, there are 4 every year, and they all have their own acronym: LSA, SPM, PIT, PIT, and HIC. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but these are various, speaking of key performance metrics, various metrics used by the federal system to, and recommended to us to keep track of our success in implementation of our homeless services. So how many people are experiencing homelessness, what is our capacity in providing shelter and housing beds, how people are moving through the system, etc. These are reports that two have already been sent to HUD, and 2 will be sent to HUD at the end of next week, I believe, because of the timeline. When we are accountable for reporting them. So we have missed our timeline in making sure that they came to this body in time for your approval action. And after consulting with your co-chairs this week, we just decided that since we've already missed 2, we're not gonna ask you to take a vote on 2 today. Instead, we will ask you to take a vote on all 4 together after you've had time to review this content. And it will be the primary discussion item for our next meeting in May, all of this data and how we use this data to think about our system. So we're gonna go deep into data. And to get you ready for that, we're going to send you these 4 HUD reports so you can familiarize yourself and know that part of your duty is approving these reports. And the reports themselves are a technical assignment that is kind of prescribed. There's not an opportunity to change the data. The data is what the reports tell us to make the data be. But nonetheless, we want to make sure that we engage our advisory body in this important function of your role. And we're recognizing that the way we manage for these timelines is probably not quite working because HUD often doesn't give us sufficient time to both get the work done and make sure you have enough time to review the work before it is due. So we're gonna have to figure out how we do this ongoing each year. We think we might look to some bylaw shifts to figure out how can we have you confirm the report with 2 days notice of reading these giant documents. So that's the HUD reports and more coming to you soon. And then the last item is a request. And so it's a little bit of an update, a little bit of a staff request. So you've all been talking with us and hearing from us about the HUD proposed rule change on mixed status households. Mixed status is rent assistance language for households who have varying degrees of immigration status to be in the United States. It is not necessarily a distinction of legal or not legal status. It is more about various eligibility statuses to be able to receive rent assistance programs. So historically, and I think since the 80s, HUD has had a mixed status rule that allows households to live together if they have mixed statuses, some with eligible statuses, some with not. And we only pay rent assistance that is reflective of the eligible household. So it's a prorated amount for the households who are eligible. This allows households with multiple generations or kids with parents who might not have an eligible status to live together and to have stable housing. And HUD is proposing, the current administration is proposing a rule change that would end that 40-year practice and impact thousands of people. I think actually it's more than thousands if we're thinking 24,000 households across the country. Specifically, I think it's 39 here in Washington County, but the majority of people impacted will be children.
Also 39.
39 households, and I believe it's like 25 children in just Washington County, but nationwide 24,000 households with mixed immigration status. So our board took up this issue, and if you want to kind of get deeper into the details, our colleague M. Nichols gave an excellent presentation to our Housing Board of Directors last week. And the board unanimously agreed we need to take a no position on this, which is now allowing us as staff to share this information with you and give you the opportunity as a solutions council to also take to recommend or to make public comment opposing this proposed rule change. So what we would like to ask is if the committee is comfortable granting permission to your chair, Kim Marshall, to sign this letter as soon as it is proposed, because the public comment period ends before your next meeting. So this would be a permission from you all to give her that authority as your chair to act on your behalf before our next meeting.
Yeah, and I think rather than voting officially, we're just asking, I think if anybody has any objections to that or any concerns with that, to please speak up. Otherwise, we just would hold the kind of an informal granting of that for Kim. So is anybody opposed to him being that designee for our group?
Nope.
Okay.
Well, thank you. We appreciate this committee speaking up along with our board And we also welcome you as individuals or organizations to also make public comment. The more the better, because it slows down the process for them being able to implement such a rule, because they have to respond to all of these public comments. We are still holding out some hope that they won't make this very unfortunate policy. There's no indication that we will be successful.
The letter was really well written. I don't know who wrote it, but it was really helped me understand it all too.
Em Nichols.
Yeah.
Yeah, not me.
Mhm.
Em Nichols is fabulous. Policy extraordinaire.
Yeah. It's in our.
Yeah, we got the email. Nadia sent it out yesterday.
Thank you. I should have been more clear about that.
Zoe. Our Hawking Kaleidoscope Day.
Yeah, what a day.
It was kind of on the same thread of.
Meeting
the
notice.
meeting notice
How would the attachment?
amongst many of the.
All right. Well, thank you. I think that concludes my very long-winded set of staff updates. Yay, welcome, Bobby.
You want to quickly share the shelter activity?
Oh, Jess already covered that.
Oh,
So we are good to go. Let's talk with plan.
Yes, so look, I want to quickly, we had a part of the updates we were gonna do, I can email everything else except for the co-chair election. So we, part of the changes that we made to the bylaws was to try to create more equity and to be cognizant of something that was brought up earlier, which is too many providers, contracted providers, having roles. And so we made the decision, if you remember, to have a contracted provider and non-contracted provider, on as part of the executive committee. So as such, Drew has offered to step down to allow someone else to take the role of co-chair. And also we're moving from chair and vice chair to co-chairs. So it's a slightly different setup. And so as far as I know, the only person that we have that's interested in the co-chair position right now is Kim Hahn. And I asked her to just prepare a short statement that everyone could hear from her before we have a vote. If anyone else meant to reach out to me and didn't for some reason, just speak now.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's hard for me to say no to Kim when she asked. When I found out, I was like, I don't know how I'm even qualified to be in that co-chair position, but I'm also really honored, especially that if you do decide that you entrust me in this, I know, I've been on the council for a little over a year, so not very long, but I've really, really enjoyed it. Like every single month that I come here, and then working even outside of the council and running into a lot of the people on this council, outside of this work here and just the amazing work we do. I mean, to be surrounded by so many people with genuine compassion for humanity, let alone one of our, he charts for one of our most vulnerable populations. So this work has been very rewarding. Listening to all you, learning so much from all of you, getting your perspectives, my role and what is done is a small piece of the pie. And I can't express my appreciation enough of what I've learned so far. I know I have a lot more to learn. So, that's my only caveat, but I want to, and I want to walk alongside all of you in this journey. And I want to hear everyone's perspectives, anything that comes up. But yeah, so I'd be absolutely honored to be the co-chair if you trust me to. And then it will be the Kim show, Kim squared. But love it.
So with that, I will entertain a motion to elect Kim Hahn to the position of co-chair effective immediately to serve for the remainder of the current term or until a successor is duly elected.
So moved, but we do have a hand up.
Okay, thank
Oh,
you.
I was also going to, I was gonna move to vote.
You want to second that?
I will second that vote and I vote yes.
Thank you. So the motion has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion before we vote? Okay, so we'll now vote. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Hi. Hands.
Anyone opposed, say nay or raise your hand. All right, the motion is passed.
Yay.
Quick thank you to Drew.
Drew, thank you. Yes, you did amazing.
You're welcome.
Thank you to
now I will-
Drew for
Yeah.
co-chairing originally and being the first to co-chair our Solutions Council. Thank you for your time, energy, dedication, and thoughtfulness in everything that you do.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate you. And I will turn it over to Katie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am here to talk about work plan. Yay. Okay, next slide. Quick update. We're gonna talk about where we're at, progress to date for year 5, talk about our year 6 goals and our local implementation plan, and have a quick discussion. Brief update. These are our Q2 data. So this is first half of the year. Where were we at? Our Q3 data we'll bring to you kind of next month in our whole data conversation, or you can watch the board. We're going to the board in May also. We are exceeding all of our targets except for one, which was homelessness prevention. So we're on track for permanent supportive housing, rapid rehab housing. We've actually already exceeded for this at this point, and shelter capacity. And then homelessness prevention, as you can recall, I've been here a couple times talking about the Housing Resolution Fund, which launched in January, which was squarely in Q3, but on track to hit that 300 for both eviction prevention and homelessness prevention that we'll see come through. So excited about that. I'm going to move us into year 6. Can you all believe we're in year 6? So we are moving into the second half of our 10-year measure. And this to me is really cool because we're in a sustaining period, but we've talked a lot about our budget and how we're really sustaining. And so you'll see a slightly different appearance in our goals. A lot of our goals are less about placements and new people that we're moving into programming and more about how are we sustaining our programs? How are we moving people off of our programs and into sustainability for their own, on their own too. So 2,000 households will continue receiving medium and long-term housing assistance in year 6. So those are folks that were served in year 5 or before and will continue to be served in year 6. 100 graduations from our housing programs into where they are in rental assistance only. So they no longer need that wraparound support. So a lot of folks know this as ARLA only specifically in this space. We're going to continue to be pushing folks if that wraparound case management support is no longer needed, but instead they do need that rent assistance only, that we're moving them on, and that's creating more spaces in our permanent supportive housing programs. And then 375 new placements between our rapid rehousing and our permanent supportive housing program. So we're still moving people in. We do have attrition and turnover in that shorter term program. We're continuing to serve people in, but it's much less than previous years. And especially the first 3 years of SHS where we were consistently launching and bringing new people into the program, where our placements were closer to the 500 to 800 numbers. Across all of our programs, we also want to maintain 85% housing retention. This has been a goal of ours consistently, and along with best practice across the country, is to see that 85% retention. Next slide. In our prevention program, there's 2 big spaces. So eviction prevention, serving 225 households. That was one of the funds that you all, we did 2 years of one-time only funding with the support from Metro. And then 300 households being served through the Housing Resolution Fund, specifically the prevention assistance and move-in only portion of that resolution fund. So continuing to see that program grow. We launched in January and are seeing a lot of case managers take that up, and we're really excited to continue to grow that in year 6. Next slide. Safety of the streets. If you haven't heard, we're opening Cornell Road Recovery, which will bring our shelter and transitional housing, our shelter to 504 units, and then transitional housing will be opening that project.
And then the one big thing we're gonna continue to focus on in year 6 is seeing our outreach be super successful. We want to see them successful in contacting people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness and then exiting them out of that unsheltered homelessness into shelter or housing or whatever that next step looks like. So a goal of seeing 75% of participants end unsheltered homelessness and successfully exit into that next stage. Lastly, access centers. Kim is going to be opening Project Homeless Connect's Hillsborough Access Center this fiscal year. We're continuing to work with Open Door on their construction of Cornelius for hopefully opening in late 2027 calendar year. So not in this fiscal year, but kind of working through the construction of that. And then also our Beaverton Access Center notice of funding opportunity going live. So many things. So across the system, we also have some pretty big goals. So our annual decision-making process for one-time funding, you all, we had a framework that went into play last year and brought it to you all, continuously implementing that when we do have carryover and one-time funding. How do we decide to spend that funding and what does that look like? Mitigating the impacts of federal policy. Jess just mentioned one of those big impacts is that mixed status household, but we also are seeing impacts to SNAP, Medicaid, and specifically the emergency housing vouchers. So how are we addressing those? How are we working to get folks consistently connected and not resulting in homelessness once again because of the changes to federal policy? We want to do that both quantitatively and qualitatively. So that first one is really quantitative about the impacts, but then also qualitatively, what are we seeing specifically in households that are part of our culturally specific cohort? The next one is our data sharing agreement. Huge kudos to Adam and the work that we're doing in partnership with him. But how can we better leverage our data sharing agreement and serve people with healthcare needs and understanding kind of what is the impacts across both of our systems of care? And then lastly, updating our local implementation plan. This has been a big goal for us. We were slightly delayed, but it's going to happen this year. We're going to get it approved for you all and through the board and kind of rolling up to Metro. And part of that local implementation plan, if you can go to the next slide, is really thinking about how do we do that work. So to date, we've brought in initial community engagement, a lot of conversations with all of you. But as we are underway, we're updating our program principles. We've had conversations on that. How do we look at our essential system of care? How do we continuously evaluate? So when we originally did our local implementation plan, we had a very limited system of care in Washington County. And so what is that now? We said, we want to establish 300 shelter beds. Well, those are established. So now what? And how do we continuously evaluate that rebalancing of the needs in our system and continuously doing improvement work for the coordinated entry prioritization, but also kind of overarchingly, how are we evaluating the work that we are doing? Are these programs successful? Should we be shifting or adapting that plan? And this framework will really be kind of the baseline for how we do that. Next slide. Questions? Do folks have questions for us? What does that look like? Anything that you would expect to see in our goals or work plan, or things you have questions about of like, what does that mean in practice? Anything like that?
I have a question. This is Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi. Hey, so I'm looking at the data sharing agreement with healthcare, but don't we also have a new data sharing agreement with the other counties? Or where's going on with that?
Our second data sharing agreement is with Metro to share data up to them. We are working through in our HMIS implementation new phase of where are we going with clarity but focus. We are looking at how do we better have cross viewing of each other in HMIS, but it wouldn't be a data share. It'll just be like a broader opening of HMIS overarchingly. Does that help? That's very in the weeds. I'm sorry.
I just thought that there was a requirement from Metro that there be a data sharing agreement between the 3 counties. So I'm a little bit confused, I think.
What is, Rachel, say a little more about what you were hoping we're able to share across counties?
Well, I mean, I guess in my dream of, just it seems like it would be really great if HMIS didn't have, if you could, just see cross all three counties, who's getting served for what, and understanding that some people are getting served in Washington County and also in Multnomah County and also in Clackamas County. I think that's particularly important now, especially like just thinking about this request from the mayor and what would happen to, I mean, the kind of pressure if we were unable, if we lost money from the system in Washington County, that would actually have a negative impact on shelters in Multnomah County. I mean, so, being able to track that kind of thing, I guess.
There's two big actions that I think are happening around that. One, we're looking at how to do it in a short-term cross comparison of people who are showing up in all three of our systems. But long-term with our HMIS implementation, there's a lot of limitations that we have in WellSky, which is our current HMIS software. And in the new software, that's a lot of what the three data groups are working on, is how do we have better visioning into it. And the Clarity allows us to have a lot more, frankly, technology to be able to do it. So there's only like one very limited way to do it in WellSky, and there is it would require a lot of changes to how we all operate coordinated entry. So we're hoping that with this change, which will go into effect about a year from now, that we'll be able to have that view into everybody else's HMIS.
So Katie, is it fair to say that that is a goal, to be able to see data across the three counties? It's not through a data sharing agreement, but through HMIS implementation improvements underway.
Yes.
Great.
Thanks.
Rachel, did that get at it?
Adam.
Katie and Jess, mostly goes to you all, but I think the Solutions Council will be happy to hear it as well. Earlier today, I saw the first blush of Washington County data paired with health share data, including population overlap and which programs people are engaged in. And so we are going to actually have something shared back with you all about utilizing our data sharing agreement for the first time within the next week or so, which I'm very, very excited about.
We're ahead of the goal.
We are much ahead of the goal.
That's great news, Adam. We're excited too.
It's me. So shouldn't also a goal with the new software system that is going to become a reality shouldn't be, because a lot of people needs to be trained and get used to the new system, and that may slow or no the work that we're doing and providers are doing right now. I don't know if that should be a goal for the year, and having everybody familiarized with the software and this new thing.
It's a great call out. It's going to be a big part of our year.
It is.
HMIS modernization. I think we're still, my sense is we're still so early in the process. It's hard to know with confidence the timeline. The goal, my understanding is the go live date is about a year from now is the goal. But again, we're still in the, building out just what the data staff can understand. And we haven't even gotten close to getting our partners trained and prepared for the new software, the new system. But nonetheless, your point is well taken that this is a major body of work for the county and the three counties and all of our providers. So it should be elevated as a goal for year 6. I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah. Another thing that the regional body is doing that I also feel like is very important for us locally is those key environmental indicators who help us or now move forward with every goal. How many evictions we have locally, the cost of the rent here in our local county, which is different from others. Having that visibility as well to either provide if we're not meeting a goal or if why people's not moving into housing fast or not, having that reality as well. Like as much as we're working here, a lot of people is also going to in the part of the eviction and the cost of rents in our county too. I feel like it's going to like increase to have that visibility as well for us and for providers and the community in general.
So will you say one more time what the goal would be then? It sounds like you're sort of describing, let's be honest with ourselves about the truth about we don't have enough eviction prevention in our system.
That, but to have visibility of the reality of the county itself on evictions, or just that we're looking into people entering inflow into homelessness, to also see that there's an unaffordability and looking at how many evictions we have in our board, analyzing that as a system. I feel like it's
Utilizing those economic indicators.
median income, which is going to be also, you know, if we are looking into people losing SNAPs benefits, TANF being reduced, supporting service on federal supports are going to be reduced. Those are factors.
Utilizing that lens
Yeah.
when creating goals and decision making. Yeah.
The KEIs at the regional level help, but it's
Yeah.
really like we need it better.
Here, it's different than every other, yeah.
Any other questions, Katie?
So we're giving this presentation to our board on Tuesday next week. And this draft work plan is due to Metro, has already been sent to Metro for April 1st as a draft. But can get finalized and can't get finalized until our board approves the budget, because our goals have to be in alignment with our resources to do the work. So your feedback here today and our board's feedback will help us refine this draft work plan and put forward those final recommendations for how we set our goals for next year.
Nadia and is Carly ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So next on our agenda is state legislative updates from Carly. And we're getting Carly ready.
Hi, everyone. Sorry if that took a little while. I was in a spinning wheel of doom for a moment while it was connecting. So I don't know if you were waiting for me, but my name is Carly Silva Gabrielson. I'm one of the government relations managers here with Washington County. There's a team of three of us who work together on all issues impacting the county happening in Salem and in Washington, D.C. So I have the honor and the privilege of representing the housing department with Washington County and Salem doing our statewide advocacy work. So thanks for letting me pop into the meeting, and just want to give special appreciation to all the work and contributions that you all give. I don't have slide control, so next slide, please, whoever. Wonderful. Okay, great. So as many of you may know, and we're probably tracking, we did just complete the short legislative session of the 2026 year. We are limited in a short session to 35 days per the constitutional requirement for the legislature to advance the very robust work of ensuring that our budget is adjusted. There's technical fixes that typically happen in a short session from legislation that was passed in the previous year. And then typically in a short session, we see a lot of policies that have been vetted and have had a lot of work done since it is such a short time frame. However, as time has really been progressing, and especially in recent years, the short legislative session are really facing a lot of significant, heavy issues, particularly responding to the changes at the federal level. So I just wanted to highlight this year we had 304 bills introduced. One thing that is nice about the short session is that the number of bills are capped, whereas a long legislative session, each legislator can introduce an unlimited amount of bills. So we see some legislators that introduce 5 bills, and there's others who are very on our radar because they like to introduce hundreds of bills. So they are limited. So we saw 300 bills this session compared to 2025 when there was about 3,400 that we were all combing through. Of course, not all impacting the housing department and this work, but really everything impacting Oregonians. So we spend a lot of time just combing through the bills. Jessica and like all of our great staff spend a lot of time really considering the impacts to the communities that we serve. So we, as the slide says, we really track the bills that impact our housing communities and the ripple impact throughout our just continuum of services. So let's get into it a little bit. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So I was going to say previously that, among the really substantive policy debates, of course, we saw a lot of things with immigration rights reform, federal responses, transportation, some things impacting public meeting law, but affordable housing preservation was a huge focus this legislature. We did see this issue taken up in 2025. So there was a lot of groundwork that was laid talking about the need for the state to step forward and create a system of funding affordable housing preservation. As many of you probably know, in Washington County, we had the situation of the Wood Springs apartments that faced the expiration of the federally regulated affordable housing. And that really was a crisis that folks were faced with. And so the county and the state and a host of folks stepped forward to ensure that funding was provided to save Wood Springs, but frankly, it was kind of the canary in the coal mine. So OHCS and others looked across the state and saw that there were thousands of units that were facing expiration, which of course would just really create a lot of folks that would maybe need supportive housing services in other areas and homelessness response services. So the state did recognize that this is something that needs an encompassing solution, not one that is just, piecemeal as these units expire. So we were really happy that there was a policy bill that advanced. The policy bill, House Bill 4036, created for the first time a fund for this specific focus for affordable housing preservation. And they're calling it the HOLD Fund, the Housing Opportunity, Longevity, and Durability Fund. It did pass, so we're celebrating that. And then in the funding bill in the legislature, leadership provided $25 million to that account. We, of course, would have loved that to be larger, but it does give us a really great avenue to go back to the legislature in the future to say, please continue funding this, and this is what success looks like, Wood Springs and the other investments that will be occurring. So really wonderful work done by a large coalition for many years to pass that bill. Next slide, please. And just, if anyone else wants to jump in with stuff, please feel free to. These two bills were really, really important. They essentially provide tenant privacy in House Bill 4123. So this is ensuring that landlords have explicit written consent from tenants before disclosing any personally identifying information. You all know how critical that is, especially in this time and day and age of a lot of data combing and harvesting. So something that the county and housing services have been really thoughtful about already, but ensuring that all tenants are held to these same standards to protect, all landlords are held to these same standards to protect tenants. Also wanted to call out Senate Bill 1523. We refer to it as the Digital Divide Bill. And really what this ensures is that landlords must require non-digital means of payment and also access to buildings, receiving crucial documents. As we all know, we have seen more and more of a push towards digital uses. And not only is that just an equity and access concern, I think many of us spend time providing, tech support services to those in our life who may be older or who may be ultra-abled. And so there's just a lot of folks in our community that are kind of edged out of access and of that equal opportunity and not having paper trails and the ability to pay their rent through checks, which seems ridiculous. But ensuring that that is just maintained across the state, so crucial. Next slide, please. Wonderful. These were some changes that were made to ensure that Oregon did not take a very, very dire hit on the federal tax code. This did receive a lot of press, but really it's essentially a partial disconnect from the federal tax code that was encompassed in Senate Bill 1507. The legislature made some really thoughtful and careful disconnects. It wasn't a full disconnect from the federal tax code, but they really looked at what that impact of loss of federal funding would be over time and made some really thoughtful changes there. And also worth highlighting that it expanded the state earned income tax credit and job creation tax credit. House Bill 4136 is one that we are hoping comes back. It did not pass, but what this would have done was that it proposed to end the mortgage interest deduction for second homes. Actually, I think this did pass. I'm going to have to Google this. That might be a typo on our slide. I don't know if Jess or Em or someone in the room could maybe Google that for me. House Bill 4136. I'm going to try and multitask there too. I thought that one had passed. I think maybe we'll follow up.
Carly, Rachel, do you happen to know in your Housing Oregon work, did mortgage deduction reform?
I mean,
pass?
I feel like if it had passed, we would have been partying like there is no tomorrow. So
I think so too.
I'm pretty sure that it didn't, but I'm actually Googling it right now. I thought, could I have missed something? I was sure that it did not.
No, you're probably right.
Party.
Yeah, let me pause, but yeah, we probably would have caught that typo. So this I will correct myself. So this did not pass and gives us a lot of opportunity to return to the legislature because this did have a lot of really great momentum. This bill, again, it would have ended the mortgage interest reduction on second homes. So really vacation homes for individuals who can afford them. And it would have applied about $9 million in revenue to provide down payment assistance for first-time homeowners. And it was projected that that would have supported approximately 250 first-time homeowners. So based on the conversations that I had in Salem, I do think this is one that has some legs and maybe momentum in the future. Rachel, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, but again,
well, just that every year we try to do this and we never have been saying. I just want to say, as soon as we start talking about it, the board of the realtors are sending flyers out about how we're just ruining the American dream. So it's a hard one. I hope it's really heartwarming to hear that maybe during the last session it did better because it's just been it's been a bummer.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember a specific conversation that I had with Majority Leader Ben Bowman, who, as we know, really understands a lot of these things. So certainly getting bills like this passed is like pushing a giant boulder up a mountain. But the more of us that get our hands on it and do that work, the more momentum we can get. So thanks for jumping in there and correcting me. Let's jump to the next slide, please. Okay, great. I guess that concludes my presentation. So I'll pause with any questions and also just want to add that if there's things that come up during the so-called off year or things that you're thinking about for 2027, we're having a lot of conversations and the momentum is starting to pick up and work towards that legislative session. So please consider me a resource. I'm always happy to take questions and receive ideas as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Carly, this is Emily in the room. I did a quick Google search and it looks like that bill didn't advance to a vote. I think you have a technical term for it when it gets sort of stuck. That's what happened.
Death by committee?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not technical.
Yep, an intentional death.
Sounds technical.
Yeah.
Thanks for confirming that.
Carly, I'll just jump in on behalf, I'm sure, many committee members who are curious about this. One of the biggest losses we've had at the legislative level recently is the loss of the legislature's commitment to eviction prevention funding.
Mm-hmm.
Can you advise us, this table of advocates, how we can be strategic in building momentum to get traction for that funding, even as we face kind of economic contraction across the state. In Washington County, it's the most expensive county in the state to rent. So eviction rates are only increasing. And it's really scary for those of us who are picking up the phones or, you know, answering those front lines of need in our community. What can
Yeah.
you offer this table on eviction prevention?
Absolutely. Really, really great question, Jess. And I think that's something that you know, all of us in the advocacy space are asking ourselves. How can we ensure that these pressing issues are breaking through in legislators' minds when they have so many other things that they're being asked to consider and prioritize? And you know, I think a lot of us have a good dose of realism and optimism in this work that we do. And so we know that there isn't a magic money tree coming to save us. And I think something that I constantly am recognizing is just the power of storytelling. And I know that this is no new tool. There's nothing revolutionary here, but I do think that, yeah, there's such great work done in the housing advocacy space, especially we have Housing Opportunity Day where so many people come down and flood the halls of Salem and really share those compelling stories. But I do think that we could be more equipped to have those narratives in our wheelhouse, ready to go before the long legislative session, starting to have meetings, starting to invite legislators to, you know, certain spaces and hear from those folks who either have, you know, faced eviction because of the current economic dynamics, or maybe there's a success story as well. But I think it's really those real life examples, those humans that they end up thinking about when they're considering this legislation. You know, not necessarily the conversation they had with the lobbyists. It's a story I'm going to tell them about, you know, the young mother in Washington County and the crisis that family was facing. So. Again, nothing new there, but I think that the power of storytelling is really what's going to continue to kind of help us advance this issue and ensure that legislators know that this is really, this investment in this space pays off just immeasurable in the rest of our communities and the rest of our work. And so I think that was actually a part of the reason that the affordable housing preservation was funded. You know, we had the crisis of Wood Springs. We had the community having to face really the reality of what that was going to look like when more homes hit that cliff. So I would love to be equipped going into the 27 session to have those narratives. Maybe it's something like we have you know, a storytelling toolbox that we pulled together. But yeah, it really is about, I think, the real life examples and the reassurance that this investment is crucial and it will pay off, you know, not only just in the future years, but also in future generations. So I'm going to keep noodling that over, Jess. And I know that's kind of an open-ended question. I think we need to continue to ask ourselves that and how we can really strengthen our muscle going into the legislative session.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Carly? Thank you,
Well,
Carly.
may I, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna
Yep.
take up more space. I just had a thought, Carly, and maybe an open question for this committee. Around mortgage interest reduction. I agree with you, Rachel. That'll be a great party, and it's hopeful to just even hear that maybe it got more traction this year. I'm curious about the idea of, because I'm assuming one of the things that we struggle with at the state level is prioritizing home ownership when homelessness and things are such a pressing issue. And yet the alignment with home ownership and mortgage interest reduction makes a lot of good sense. And I'm curious if there's a way, if it would be a good idea to leverage our family self-sufficiency programs and housing authorities that are helping graduate people off of rent assistance into homeownership, and pairing that revenue, that future revenue with, you know, making more room for our urgently needed rent assistance programs would help that become a more effective concept for legislators to buy in. Maybe that's too wonky. Did anybody? Sorry.
Well, I do have some awesome family self-sufficiency stories that we haven't had a chance to follow up on, and now we have Gabi, so.
I know, I'm taking notes in this area.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Even a toolkit then can be something that a lot of different people can access with that type of information in it. Makes a ton of sense. And I like how you're thinking long-term too, right? So how can something that we do now also impact things down the road?
Jeff, if I may, one other thing that comes to mind is the sale of the Section 18 homes. Like, that's an amazing story for second home buyers and the impact that.
Exactly. Yeah, Rachel, what are you thinking?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last comment about Section 8. What was?
18, Section 18, we had a disposition of single-family homes
Oh,
in the House
right.
40.
Section
and we're-
18, right, got it. Yes, I think the thing about rent, I feel like there's a continuum of like, there's a lot around asset building that does have, I think, a natural connection to the funding and all, I can say that there's so many agencies that are now making recommendations to the state around funding issues in this area. So there's like, obviously Housing Oregon, there's the Welcome Home Coalition, there's Here Together, there's the Housing Alliance. They've already started advocating for what they want to see happening in the budget next year. And I do think also there's this issue around the IDAs that I feel like those have really been have really suffered in terms of asset building and I think you guys must use those for your self-sufficiency program. I'm not sure, but it's very hard to access them. So there is this whole piece around self-sufficiency that I do think lends itself to if the mortgage interest deduction were ever to like get real traction. So, but also I think we really need to come up with a strategy for rent assistance. I think we've been relying a little bit on HealthShare's rent assistance program in the community. And I'm curious, like if Medicare really gets, gutted, if that's even gonna live. Adam, you can't tell, but I'm looking at you and I just have been worrying about that. So.
Yeah, I don't anticipate HRSN going on beyond our next waiver, which would be that runs in 2020 through September of 2027. The federal government has stated that they will not be supporting any new HRSN or any existing HRSN waiver requests or renewing them. So it's not officially gone, or there's not officially a deadline, but I don't foresee that continuing after September of 27.
I have a question. I think like for me, I'm becoming new to the game with this 4136, the second home mortgage interest thing. Like at the heart of it, I get it, I understand, but as an average Oregonian, no. Like I might say this could hurt Oregon in the long run. $9 million for the state seems a small amount to change something that has been working for a reason for a long period of time. So if I were to go out of this space and try to champion that or advocate that, as we are leaders in this area, I think I would need more language around why I need more help. I need a toolbox. I need to have more conversations. Like I might need to take Rachel to lunch. To be able to understand the actual value in that for the long term for the state of Oregon. Because other states make changes in their income levels and taxing and et cetera. And long term, it's projected to be an actual negative. So understanding, like, is this really a benefit for us in Oregon? Or is there another way to look at getting some of that money to be able to assist first-time homeowners? Does that make sense? I feel like I just need to voice that because everybody seems really positive on it. And I'm going, whoa, questioning, like, I feel like something doesn't sit well. So I'm voicing that.
I appreciate that because I can actually relate because I'm not married, so I have my own home that I rent out.
Yeah, I
And
own
as soon as
homes as well.
as soon as I heard this, I thought, well, if that happens, because right now I run in the red because I just refuse to increase my rent because I
Bless
don't
you.
want to push my renter out.
As well do I.
And then I'm like, well, crap, if I can't, I'm still in the red even after taxes
Yeah.
because of, it's just an added expense because I still have to pay a mortgage on it too,
Mhm.
and property taxes and insurance and all that. I'd have to increase this rent. And now we're
Working against
working
ourselves.
against the whole goal of it. I would try not to, but I have expenses of my own that I have to pay
Valid.
for in the house that I live in with my partner, and I
Yeah.
have to help keep a roof over our head too. And so, same, Rachel, we need to get together because I'd love to join you in that party.
I
but
do want to
guess-
share just really quickly that the bulk of the mortgage interest deduction reform goes to the wealthiest people in our country, goes to the top 1%. Because they are the ones who benefit. And this is, and I understand that for some people, a second home is a yacht or a vacation home. And for other people, it's part of your retirement plan. And it's, there's probably all kinds of room to craft I don't even know exactly what the language was here. But, so I'm happy to talk about it though, anytime. So. Yes. And you don't even have to take me to lunch, although I do love lunch.
Well, Rachel sits as I believe, the chair of the Housing Oregon industry group that represents affordable housing entities across the state. And they lead a lot of this policy work. And I believe is mortgage interest deduction one of the key reform, one of the key policy platforms of Housing Oregon, Rachel?
Yes, it is. And every year I'm like, are we really going to do that again? Because it never passes. We've been trying so hard for so many years. So, but yeah.
Well, maybe I was just saying, like, maybe a better understanding it for people like me might help you get further along in that conversation. I mean, I'm just offering.
Yeah.
I have a second. Thank you. I have a second thought on, we were talking about eviction prevention, and I think that everybody in this room probably has a couple, if not many, personal stories of people that would include, like, give you that narrative, right? I can pull that out anytime and have those conversations. What I can't do is pull out the data behind it. So I think that sometimes we think in terms of stories as being the most powerful piece for a lot of people, when really what moves the needle is the actual data proof behind it. And if you can combine those two together, you're going to make a better case for it. So I just don't have the data to be able to argue with someone. I'm all for it. I want eviction prevention, right? I think keeping people in the place where they're at and keeping them successful is awesome. I'm just expressing the need for more. And then also, what is the reason that there is no eviction prevention right now? Is it, and the funding, I guess, I get it. It's all gone, stripped away, yada, yada. But what made it so that it's not an important piece anymore? And is it because I'm throwing it out an idea. Is it because there are rules around eviction prevention that people don't like? And they're saying there is no guidance, there is no structure, they're just giving money to keep them in their house. Is that true? I mean, I'm not asking that question. I'm sorry. That was rhetorical, right? And so because of that, and not understanding, maybe a method to finding more eviction prevention dollars might be to create better structure around how those dollars are going to be spent and plugging that narrative rather than we want to keep everybody in the same safe space. Okay, we heard you, government entity people who give us money, and we're going to create a structure that's a little bit more well-defined. I don't know if that makes sense, and I don't know if I'm saying the wrong thing, but I'm trying to create different narratives and throw it out there to get that work passed, because I want the money too. So sorry.
Carly, can I invite you in? I want to make sure, Zoe, you also get invited in. But Carly, I'm curious, is what Christina's saying, was that sometimes the feedback you would hear from legislators when you were talking about eviction prevention over the last few sessions?
I think that's right. I do think that it is an outcome of just a limited pie of, of the funding
get that.
constraints and of the shock of what the changes at the federal level have been. They have been very, very deep. And I don't think a year ago, the legislature or the executive really fully understood. But yeah, I think you're really hitting the nail on the head about needing to have kind of the full picture of the story, of the data, of the value of the investment. So I agree with a lot of that.
I would like to, I just wanted to say, I think if we can, the problem is it's very hard to quantify the value of eviction prevention because you're measuring something that didn't happen. And it's so vital. Like people who do that work know that just like sometimes a tiny bit of money can make a huge difference in an outcome. And so it's so frustrating. It's frustrating to not have that resource available for folks. But I think we really do need to come up with some methodology to measure impact. I don't know. I'd be willing. I'm not a data head, but I'd certainly be willing to brainstorm because I do think that if we could show impact, because there is impact, it would be great. But it's kind of like advertising. It's like you don't know if you never know if it's really successful. You just maybe have a gut feeling about it. But it's very hard to measure something that works because something else didn't happen.
I get that.
I feel there is a way, because, I am the biggest advocate. I am the organization who received the funding and dispersed the funding. And I want thinking all the ways that I can prove that this works. So one of the things that I've been looking is into the Evicted Oregon data. And from that, I find that, for example, in Washington County, and they listed all the county, last updated was March 15. So that's pretty accurate to now. We have, let's say, 1,000 eviction filings. That means people that have received the judgment of eviction on their door. With that, you go and see, and it's in there, how many people actually have to leave and move out of the unit because of the restitution. Those are, and then you see in this data the non-payment eviction filings for no payment, sorry. And from 1,000, let's say only 200 really move into restitution. So that means that the other 700, whatever, I'm not good at math, were able to stay in housing because there is a resource there available, thanks to the law HB 1000, whatever, that you cannot evict somebody that is receiving assistance or have made partial payment. So I believe that if in a region there is not that support, those restitution numbers are going to be higher because there's going to be more people that are going to be evicted, really, like kicking out of the unit. But because there is resource, there are filings, but there's no restitutions because people look for the resource before that happening. So that is a way to inform that it's helping, and the HB 1000 yes, work because there is resource available, and that is a way. And the follow-ups that we do with the people that we're supporting is also a way. It's one time only. There's a lot of misconception that people return for service, and it's not true. We also have data on that. And one-time support helps really stabilize families in our region, in our county, in our state. So how do you prove that? Elevating the word. And I don't know if one story of a family will also help, but
Well, even the cost difference between helping someone before they get evicted to, they get evicted, now now they need,
30,000 more.
now they need the
expensive.
first and last and
Yeah.
furniture and all the other
Moving costs.
costs, like,
Yeah.
there has to be a way to show that just the cost difference is gonna be immensely cheaper to
Mhm.
keep eviction prevention and having those, like you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's just a one-time cost versus now you've got to get this person or this
Mhm.
family started up all from scratch,
Right.
which is gonna be, has to be way more than,
To a degree, I think one thing
Yeah.
I've noticed that's interesting recently is because of. I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I'm just gonna acknowledge this statement might be unpopular and please push back on me, y'all. Because there have been an increasing efforts to protect tenants from eviction, all well-meaning and oftentimes necessary, it can also take months for someone's rent, for someone to fall behind in rent, such that they don't have an eviction notice until they owe $8,000 in back rent. And the eviction notice is the tool to get the eviction prevention. But the support to pay to resolve that eviction is actually quite expensive.
oh yeah, that's true.
So is that fair what I'm describing? Do you want to push back on me?
And some, yes, and it happens, and maybe yes, true that landlords don't have a law that you need to move into the process after that 30 days of no payment, but some do, others don't. And so, but we have people that have 2, 3, 4, 5 months of debt, but the majority, they might already only have one. So I have data here, because I'm preparing a report for you.
That's great.
And where is it? It was interesting to see. Okay, so we have done a total of 247 payments of eviction prevention, rent assistance, collateral, whatever.
Mhm.
So from those 247, up to 5,115. 115 need only one time payment of up to 5,000.
Mhm.
We only help people who have not been supported in the last 12 months because we
Mhm.
needed to do some adjustment there. Then we have 88 from 247, 88 payments from 5,000 to 10,000. And we have 39 on those cases from 10,000 to 20,000.
Oh, wow.
So only 39.
So it can be really expensive because how much does it cost on average for us to move someone in out of homelessness? Did you say 3,000 earlier
Less
today?
than $3,000.
Yeah,
But that's only like, that's move-in only.
that's
right?
not
So-
counting shelter costs. or
Yep,
something.
that's like literally, we are just cutting the check to get them in the door. So right now, through the Housing Resolution Fund, we've been averaging about just shy of $3,000 of what folks need.
and there's plentiful affordable housing units to move people into that,
Well, that's a whole
No.
nother
well,
bucket of
yeah, I mean.
stuff, Kim.
I know, I thought she was being sarcastic. I thought she was like. I actually ask questions because I don't know. That's valid, I don't know either.
We should not be moving folks in whether they can't sustain that rent long term. And so that would be the question that we're asking with the Housing Resolution Fund is what is the plan to pay the ongoing rent costs? And is that a roommate? Is that an affordable housing unit? Is that you have multiple people making income in the house that you are able to afford it? So that is the planning that we ask our liaisons or shelter providers or outreach team, whoever is working with the person.
So that 3,000 involve our room, all of those different stabilities that this is rent pay, this is landlord paying to landlord and perhaps late fees added on those 115 up to 5,000. So I can see how it's cheaper.
The $3,000 is just the like move-in itself, like we are paying like deposit, first month's rent, utility deposit, whatever they need to be able to like get handed keys. It is not the late fees, it's not paying off past evictions, anything like that. So, and they've probably already at that point gotten their application fee paid for. This is literally just the check to hand over keys.
Thank you.
And also does not include staff costs, just saying, like, because there is somebody working with them, right? So we're paying liaison through other means to help them with that wraparound support.
Well, and there's also like all the costs connected to being homeless for a long time. Because people don't roll right into housing if they end up leaving housing. Once you leave housing, you also lose all your stuff. And I mean, it's like a ton, but you know, there's all kinds of like financial costs that aren't connected to the moving into apartment process. So
Yeah. Or also like lost employment wage, like what are all the non-tangible costs? The mental health impacts, the
Physicals.
experiencing homelessness is not, there's no cost to it.
What a rich discussion. Oh, sorry.
I would be curious, one of the things that I think a lot about is how does the healthcare system identify prevention and this cost savings of prevention of somebody seeing a doctor comparatively going to the emergency room? And I know you have the cost for seeing the doctor, but is that something that we should be thinking about when we look at the homeless services system? Is how is healthcare managing how are you all telling the story about prevention? Because you all have been doing it a lot longer than us.
You know, one of the ways that there is an algorithm for avoidable ED utilization. And so that's one of the big key performance indicators that we're looking at is, was this an avoidable trip? Like some ER visits are good. Like we want people going to the ER when they need to, and others are only because that's the resource that people know how to use and aren't able to connect to their healthcare in other ways. So there are indicators of like, we do have some, Katie, and I could definitely get you connected with some of our folks who are much better at the data side of things than I am, but we definitely do have some of those and have preventative care and cost data built into some of our metrics.
Well, thanks, Adam. Yeah, we'd definitely love to connect with Leslie on our team and just be thinking about this differently. I mean, we talked about, there's just in a presentation before this talking about how we're the emergency room to be responsive to all these different issues happening and how do we start to solve for that. I'm going to.
I'm not good. It's funny. I was getting ready to end the meeting and it's all because I'm not good with waiting when I say, does anybody have any questions?
To the Jeopardy song.
I know. Not good, but all that we would have missed.
Sorry, I just keep things going.
No, it's all good. Does anyone have anything else to add? And I will wait. And pause. Okay. We have 4 minutes left. If anybody does have a committee update they wanted to share. Otherwise we can give folks 4 minutes left or 4 minutes of their day back, and we'll receive those updates in email. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate you being here and for the discussion. Oh, I didn't miss that.
Yes, they were here.